The Caitlin Clark conversation never really slows down, and the Indiana Fever are once again right at the center of it all as the 2026 season approaches. This time, it's not just about basketball plays or preseason results. It's about a narrative that got completely out of control online, a rivalry that was manufactured on social media, and a storyline that suddenly looks very different now that both players are actually on the same team. Everything started with one moment from college basketball that fans never forgot. During the 2023 NCAA Final Four matchup between Iowa and South Carolina, Caitlin Clark found herself matched up against Raven Johnson. In that game, Clark made a defensive read that would later become one of the most replayed clips in women's basketball. She backed off Johnson on the perimeter, essentially daring her to shoot, and gestured away from her in a way that instantly went viral. At the time, it was just a competitive basketball moment. Confident defense, elite level awareness, nothing more. But online, that clip turned into something bigger. Years later, it became the foundation for a full-blown rivalry narrative that many fans and social media accounts ran with, even without any real inside information from either program. As Johnson's college career progressed at South Carolina, that moment followed her everywhere. It became a talking point, a meme, and eventually something she addressed directly in interviews leading up to the WNBA draft. In those conversations, she admitted that the attention and criticism tied to that clip affected her more than people realized. She even described a period where she seriously questioned whether she wanted to continue playing basketball at all. That honesty shifted the conversation. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a viral clip anymore. It was about how young athletes deal with pressure, online scrutiny, and the weight of being turned into a storyline they didn't fully control. Then came the twist that no one online narrative really accounted for. Johnson entered the WNBA draft and was selected by the Indiana Fever. That meant she was now walking into the same locker room environment as the very player tied to that viral moment. That's where the internet completely took over again. Before training camp even fully settled, clips from Johnson's past interviews resurfaced everywhere. The same college moment, the same comments about feeling overwhelmed by criticism, and the same wave-off clip were suddenly being used to build a story about tension inside the Indiana Fever before a single real game was played. The narrative grew fast. Some people insisted Clark and Johnson were already in conflict. Others claimed the Fever had drafted a problem into the locker room, and a smaller but very loud group pushed the idea that Johnson might even be better suited to start over Clark. None of these claims came from inside the organization. There were no confirmed reports, no verified quotes from coaches, and no locker room leaks backing it up. It was all interpretation layered on top of old footage and recycled quotes. What made it spread even faster was how easily people connected the dots in the wrong way. Clark is one of the most competitive players in the league, and that alone was enough for some to assume she must be difficult to play with. Johnson had openly spoken about emotional challenges tied to that college moment, and that got twisted into a grudge storyline. But once training camp actually began, the entire tone started to shift. Instead of avoiding each other or feeding into the online drama, Clark and Johnson began doing something completely different. They started working together. That didn't fit the narrative people had built, so it didn't get as much attention at first. But inside the Fever facility, something else was happening. Johnson was adjusting to the pace of the WNBA, learning new terminology, and adapting to a system that moves faster and requires sharper decision-making than college basketball. And the player she started asking the most questions to was Clark. That detail changed everything. Because instead of distance or tension, what developed was something far more practical. Clark, who already understands the Fever system at a high level, began helping Johnson through reads, positioning, and decision-making. Not in a dramatic way, not for headlines, but in the normal way experienced guards help rookies adjust. Clark herself even acknowledged it in a calm, matter-of-fact way, explaining that Johnson asks a lot of good questions and that part of being a point guard is helping younger players adjust to the league. There was no hesitation, no visible awkwardness, just basketball being taught and learned in real time. Johnson's role on the floor also started to make more sense in that environment. Known for her defensive intensity and ability to pressure the ball, she began showing exactly why Indiana drafted her. She created turnovers, pushed transition opportunities, and brought a level of defensive energy that coaches quickly noticed during practice and preseason action. Head coach Stephanie White pointed out her impact directly, highlighting her effort, defensive instincts, and ability to change the tone of possessions. Even when she made mistakes, what stood out was her response, immediately bouncing back instead of getting stuck in frustration. That matters more than people realize, especially for a rookie trying to earn trust early in the season. But the bigger picture is how this pairing actually fits on the court. Clark thrives in transition and as a high-paced playmaker. Johnson thrives as a defensive disruptor who can create chaos and give Clark extra possessions to work with. Those two skill sets don't compete, they complement each other. That's the part that gets lost in the online debate. The idea that one must replace the other was never really grounded in basketball reality. In practice, they solved different problems. Still, the conversation didn't slow down. After draft night, the old college clip resurfaced again, and so did Johnson's earlier comments about how much that moment affected her confidence. Once again, the internet tried to turn it into proof of ongoing tension. But inside the Fever organization, the reality continued moving in a different direction. Johnson's defensive presence started showing up consistently in drills and scrimmages. She was active on the ball, creating pressure full court and forcing mistakes. Clark, meanwhile, continued operating as the primary offensive engine, but with more support around her than in previous seasons. And then something important happened that completely disrupted the rivalry narrative again. Johnson herself publicly shifted the tone. In a press setting, she spoke about Clark in a completely different way than what online debates had suggested. Instead of referencing conflict, she called Clark her mentor, praised her leadership, and even referred to her as one of the greatest players she has learned from. She talked about joining the Fever with the mindset of trying to win a championship together. That wasn't vague. It wasn't careful wording. It was direct. At the same time, Clark continued to respond with the same consistency. She didn't lean into drama. She didn't avoid Johnson. She treated her like a teammate who was adjusting to the league and needed support, which is exactly what she is. From a basketball perspective, the pairing is already showing why Indiana made the move. Johnson's defense helps set the tone early in possessions. Clark's playmaking takes over after that pressure creates opportunities. And surrounding them are scoring options like Kelsey Mitchell and the interior presence of Aaliyah Boston, giving the Fever multiple ways to attack depending on matchup. Even preseason moments showed flashes of how dangerous this group can become when everything clicks. Boston's chemistry with Clark, in particular, continues to evolve, especially in pick-and-roll situations where defensive rotations are forced into tough decisions. Add Johnson's defensive energy into that mix, and suddenly Indiana has a much more balanced identity than the online discourse suggests. The irony in all of this is that the rivalry narrative was built without any real access to what was actually happening inside the team. It was constructed from an old clip, a few emotional interview moments, and assumptions about personality. But once both players stepped into the same system, the story changed in real time. What started as "she broke me" and a viral wave-off has now turned into late-night film sessions, practice communication, and a rookie asking questions while the player she was supposedly in conflict with answers them without hesitation. That shift alone says more than any online argument ever could. As the Indiana Fever prepare for the 2026 season, the real focus is no longer on manufactured drama. It's on whether this young roster can turn its mix of star power, defensive energy, and evolving chemistry into consistent wins. And if the early signs are any indication, the most talked about rivalry in women's basketball might have already quietly turned into something else entirely, a backcourt partnership built on competition, communication, and a shared goal of winning at the highest level.